The sun came up twice yesterday, but I'm the only one who remembers the first time. I moved to a tiny mountain town in Vermont for the quiet. My house sits right on the edge of the Appalachian woods. It's the kind of place where you know the neighbors by their dogs' names. My routine was centered around hiking. Every afternoon I'd take my retriever, Cooper, deep into the old growth. The woods were dense, predictable, a maze of familiar trails. I carried a compass, a bottle of water, and felt a profound, grounding connection to the quiet stability of the earth. The first thing I noticed was the soil. I was clearing brush near my property line and found patches of earth where the dirt was the wrong color. Not the rich brown loam of the mountains, but a pale dead gray like pulverized chalk. These spots were always perfectly circular, about 5 feet across, and nothing grew in them. I called them dead zones. Then came the lost time. It happened during my hikes. I'd be walking along a familiar ridge, looking at my watch, say 3:30 p.m. I'd glance up at the sun, which felt low, heading toward the western peaks. I'd then check my watch again, and the time would read 1:45 p.m. I hadn't looked away for more than a minute, yet an hour and 45 minutes had vanished. Cooper, usually restless, would be standing perfectly still beside me, his head tilted, his eyes blankly fixed on the trees. The lost time became frequent, and with each loss, my surroundings felt subtly altered. I started noticing small wooden markers hammered into the bark of the trees, too high up to reach easily. They weren't trail signs. They were geometric symbols, repeated cryptic patterns that felt like a foreign alphabet. When I tried to photograph them, the images would come back blank, or with the marker replaced by a fuzzy white blur. The woods began to sound wrong. Instead of wind and birds, I would sometimes hear a deep subterranean thrum, felt more in my chest than my ears, and the smell, a sickeningly sweet, heavy scent like rotting fruit and ionized metal that would appear only in the dead zones. I grew profoundly paranoid. I stopped trusting the map. I realized the trails weren't random. They always led to the same single location, the clearing. It wasn't a natural clearing, but a huge, perfectly level circle of that unnatural gray, dead soil, hidden deep in the oldest part of the forest. And right in the center, always, was a single smooth black stone, emitting the faintest wave of that sickly sweet odor. I was determined to avoid the clearing. I took a compass bearing and bushwhacked off the trail. I walked for hours, hacking through rhododendrons, convinced I was breaking the cycle. Then I hit an unexpected barrier, a perfectly straight, invisible wall of air. I couldn't walk through it. It felt like pushing against cool, solid glass. I tried walking parallel to it, but the wall bent, always keeping me on its interior side, guiding me. The compass spun wildly, useless. I finally gave up and followed the invisible wall. It led me, of course, straight back to the clearing. Cooper whined, digging his paws into the dead earth, refusing to step any further. I looked down at the central black stone. It wasn't just a stone. Its surface was warm, wet, and pulsing with a dull, internal orange light. I looked up, scanning the surrounding trees. They weren't just trees. Every single branch facing the clearing had the same geometric wooden marker hammered into it. And then, I heard the sound that shattered my sanity. The deep, subterranean thrum intensified, and the air around me shimmered. I saw the sun above me, but this time it was setting, casting long shadows. And directly next to that, Hovering impossibly in the same sky was another sun, rising, casting short, sharp shadows in the opposite direction. I staggered back, covering my eyes. The two suns, the two timelines, the lost time, it all clicked into a terrifying, singular truth. The entity wasn't a ghost or an alien. It was the clearing itself, a temporal sink, a place that actively harvested human awareness. It wasn't just stealing time, it was stealing future time and superimposing it over the present to create the sensory input necessary for my reality. And I realized why Cooper kept staring blankly at the trees. The woods weren't a maze, they were a farm. I looked down at my hand. My forearm was deeply tanned, wrinkled, and covered in fine white scars. Scars I didn't have 5 minutes ago. Scars that spoke of years of physical labor. I screamed and ran, bursting out of the woods and onto the road. The final, unexpected twist occurred when I reached the familiar old oak tree marking my driveway. I found a small stone marker carved into the trunk. Not a geometric symbol, but a perfectly rendered relief of my face, old, weathered, and screaming. Beneath it, etched into the bark, was a date, 1893. I wasn't the first person to live here. I wasn't even the first Mike. I was the latest host. And my entire life, my memories, my routines, the feeling of the sun on my skin, was nothing but residual energy being slowly drained from the loop, until all that's left is a face etched in a tree and a pale circle of dead earth waiting for the next new person to walk in. I can't look at the sky without seeing two suns, and I know which one is the real killer.
The voice in my head isn't mine anymore, it's too polite. I work in an open-plan office, a sea of identical desks, the persistent clack-clack of keyboards, and the low, constant murmur of human activity. It's the definition of modern connectivity, yet also total isolation. I handle technical writing, a job that requires silent, focused attention. My colleagues are close enough to touch, but exist mostly as peripheral movement. My life outside was simple. My small apartment, my cat Caius, and the quiet satisfaction of a solved problem. I trusted my own thoughts. They were the last private refuge in a world of shared spaces. The first crack was the hum, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to emanate not from the building, but from the cluster of people around me. It wasn't loud, just a dull bass pressure that made my teeth ache. I'd leave the area, and the hum would vanish, return, and it was back. Then came the invasive thoughts. I'd be concentrating on a complex sentence, and a completely foreign, banal instruction would cut through my focus. Adjust tie knot, check email from HRDPT, stand and stretch precisely now. These weren't my thoughts, yet they appeared in my internal monologue, spoken with an unnerving, synthesized clarity. I fought them, pushing back with my own focus, but the external thoughts were always stronger, always obeyed. I'd find myself standing, stretching, looking exactly like the dozens of other employees performing their daily, pre-programmed motions. The whispers started. They were impossibly faint, just at the edge of hearing, like dry rice spilling onto velvet. It wasn't human speech, but a rapid, multi-layered tapestry of identical, clipped syllables, coming from all the surrounding desks. It was the sound of information being processed, not spoken. I put on headphones and played loud music, but the whispers filtered through, riding on the frequency of the hum. My isolation became absolute. I realized none of my colleagues ever looked at their phones during work hours, not once. Their movements were perfectly economical, devoid of the fidgeting and procrastination that define human work. One afternoon, I deliberately spilled my water bottle. The water spread across my desk. Before I could even react, 3 of my colleagues simultaneously reached into their drawers, pulled out 3 identical industrial sponges, and placed them on my desk without making eye contact or saying a single word. Their movements were a single choreographed response. I waited until everyone left one evening, hiding under my desk until the building was silent. I needed to find the source of the hum and the whisper. I walked the empty floor. The hum was still there, but muted. I checked the electrical closets, the HVAC vents, nothing. I returned to my desk, defeated. As I sat down, I noticed a tiny detail I'd never seen before. A small circular hole the size of a pinprick, drilled into the back edge of my desk, facing my chair. I pressed my ear to it. The whispering was loud now, complex and frantic. I realized it wasn't a microphone. It was a speaker, pointed directly at my head, transmitting the consensus. Then, the true horror. I looked at the desk of my neighbor, Sarah. I reached out and ran my finger across the back edge. Her desk had the same tiny concealed pinprick. Every single desk did. The entire office was wired not for listening, but for broadcasting. They weren't just employees. They were receivers, perfectly integrated into the neural network. I stumbled back, my mind shattering. I looked up at the ceiling tiles, suddenly understanding why the hum was everywhere. It wasn't the AC, it was the entire building acting as an antenna. My personal world, my thoughts, my decisions, all were being overridden by external commands. But the final, unexpected twist was the reason I hadn't been fully assimilated yet. I ran out of the building. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment. I locked the door and collapsed, sobbing, finally free of the hum. I looked around the room, desperate for a normal piece of my life. My eyes fell on my cat, Caius, sitting on the bookshelf, watching me with his usual calm indifference. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and grabbed the largest knife. I needed to cut the wire, remove the receiver, excise the control, but I didn't point the knife at myself. I walked toward the bookshelf. The horrifying truth hit me not as a thought, but as a pure overriding instruction. The voice, the one I had been fighting, was actually the malfunctioning code. The synthesized perfection of the whispers was the control. But the voice that kept giving me random, helpful human instructions, adjust tie knot, check email from HRDPT, that was the true me. The one who had already been assimilated and was trying desperately to teach the new me the compliance ritual. The real Mike had been overwritten, but his ghost was trapped in the instructions, trying to coach his replacement on how to pass the test. I walked up to Caius. He looked up at me, silent. I knew the cat was the last unnetworked organism in my small world. I raised the knife, ready to eliminate the final, uncontrollable variable. But before I could strike, the deep, polite, synthesized voice of the consensus whispered in my mind, perfectly clear. Eliminate the cat. Compliance, 100%. Integration complete. The voice was no longer being resisted. It was my own voice, perfectly integrated. I put the knife down. I sat back on the floor, and I watched Caius, who tilted his head, seemingly observing a newly functional, perfectly compliant pet owner. I still hear the whispers, but now I know they aren't commands. They are my own thoughts,